Hello everyone and welcome back to this short coverage of the second Piatigorsky Cup of 1966. It is Borislav Ivkov versus Boris Spassky. This is round 7 and both of them are having a pretty decent event. Boris being undefeated so far even more so. And Boris, well, we've seen that game against Bobby Fischer. That was a very nice one. In round 1 he drew against Tigran Petrosyan. Then that beautiful victory, if you haven't seen it, check it out. I made a video on it against Wolfgang Gunzika. Then a draw, 4 draws in a row versus Reshevsky, Larsen, Portish, and Najdorf. And then we have this game against Borislav Ivkov. This is one round before Spassky's first encounter with Bobby Fischer in this tournament. And that game I've already covered. So if you want, you can check out that one after this video. For example. And Ivkov, he started very nicely. He defeated Larsen in round 1, but then 2 losses in a row. He lost to Najdorf, and then in round 3, that very nice game to Fischer that I've shown in the previous video. And then, okay, a couple of draws, and now he faces Boris. So, yeah, let's check it out. It's quite a nice game and has a beautiful finish. So let's check it out. Ivkov with white opens with pawn to d4. We have knight to f6 by Boris and pawn to c4. Pawn to e6. Boris announces that if knight to c3, he's ready to go for the Nimzo Indian, most likely. But we have the anti-Nimzo. We have knight to f3, and now Boris strikes with b6. So this is the most popular way how you could counter the anti-Nimzo maneuver, this knight f3 with the queen's Indian defense. Pawn to b6, g3, we have bishop to b7, bishop to g2, and now bishop to e7. Both players castles, knight to c3, and now knight to e4. You're playing black, so it makes sense to trade down a little bit on e4. Knight captures, bishop captures, and now knight e1, offering a trade of bishops as well. So bishop captures, and now knight captures on g2. And this is merely a weapon of choice. We haven't even started playing chess here. Even though I don't have access to the clock times, I imagine they blitzed this out. Like maybe they, thought for, 10 minutes on first move, because back then people did that, maybe just to confuse your opponent or maybe to start them overthinking. But other than that, I imagine it was blitzed out fairly quickly. But here, pawn to d5 is the main way to counter this line. And it's the move that was played in the game, pawn to d6 by Boris. This is played maybe in 10% of cases, whereas let's say d5 is the 100%. So okay, pawn to e4, grabbing the center, and now knight to d7. Here again, you could decide maybe to play something like c5 and then you go d5, bishop f6. It's definitely possible, but Boris wants to be flexible, and he's still waiting to see how Borislav will. Oh, it's actually Borislav versus Boris. Haven't even figured that out until now. But yeah, he wants to see if it's going to be an a4 or maybe a3 b4 or b3, which is probably the most likely. Will white be the one that pushes pawn to d5? So he with knight d7, just keeping it very flexible. And here we have bishop to e3. Interestingly, some 10 years after this game was played, Nukim Raskovsky will play this exact position, but only knight will come to e3 against Anatoly Karpov, who was a world champion at the time. It was, after 1975, where Fischer decided not to defend his title, and that game ended in a draw. But here we have bishop to e3, and now there are a couple of moves that were played in this position by other players, but after queen to c8, it is now, as of move 12, that we have a completely new game, and this position has never been reached again. So it makes sense. If you want to play c6, c5, the queen will be a nice support. Also, you could fianchetto the queen, you could play queen to a6, all very much possible. And you could, again, definitely decide to throw in a d5 right away, fight against that c6 push. You could play a3, maybe prepare b4, you could play a4, b3, always an option. But here we have knight to f4. Borislav wants to activate the knight, pawn to c6, and now rook to c1. Okay, definitely all makes sense here, and well, the position is very nice for both Borislav and Boris. We have rook to e8, and now knight to d3. Pawn to c5 finally by Boris, and pawn to f3. We have queen to a6, now putting pressure on that a2 pawn, and here b3 is the move that should be played. It's just that b3 creates such a nice pawn structure that it's very, very hard to try anything against it. Instead, pawn to a4 was played. The idea behind b3 is that, again, it maintains the flexibility, but a2 is never a target, because if you capture a2, rook a1 traps the queen. So that's something to consider. But okay, Borislav played pawn to a4, and Boris played bishop to f6. We have knight to f2, and now c captures on d4. And this exchange on d4 is only possible because of the misplaced rook on c1. I imagine that's why this bishop to f6 idea was played. It's not misplaced, in general. It's just misplaced in this particular line, as you'll see. So bishop captures on d4, we have bishop captures, queen captures, and now you could imagine something like queen captures, but no, knight c5. And this is the problem. The whole thing works because now the threat is knight b3 attacking the queen and the rook. So you have to do something about it. You could either move the queen to c3 or you could capture on d6 and trade pawns. So queen captures on d6, queen captures on a4, and now queen back to d1, offering a queen trade, and the Boris declines, says queen to b4. Now the pawn is stuck on b2, and you will simply improve. You'll play pawn to a5, maybe pawn to a4, and then figure out how to go about this b2 pawn. Probably trade off the rooks, then try to be as active as possible, activate your king as much as possible, and then just at the right time somehow win this b pawn while creating chances against the white king. I imagine that was Boris's game plan here. But okay, we have queen to c2, also adding more support to c4, rook e to d8, and the rook f to d1. You have to contest the d file, otherwise this rook comes to d2 and you can resign on the spot. Pawn to h6, creating some breathing room for the black king, and rook captures on d8. We have rook captures, rook to d1, and the other pair of rooks gets traded off. It's not that Borislav wants to do this. Sorry, not queen captures, knight captures on d1 was played, adding more support here, but it's you either give Boris the open d file or you trade off rooks. That's all there is to it. And now you could maybe play some moves trying to get the knight into the game. Maybe you go knight b3, also a very nice idea, but also it's very hard to decline going queen e1. And that is exactly what Boris does. Queen e1 check, king to g2, and now pawn to a5. And here the best for white, even though white is already struggling here, is knight to f2 followed by h4. But Borislav played pawn to h4 right away, and believe it or not, Spassky's position is winning here. It's not easy to figure out why, and Spassky even did not go for it in the game. But okay, we don't have the clock times, and the plan that Spassky went for is also very, very difficult to defend. So in practical terms, it was probably he was going to win it either way. But yeah, just for fun, what would you play here? Do you see the specific maneuver that eluded both players? So the move in question is knight to a6. Believe it or not, only move that wins the game for black. And by win the game for black, I mean if you play it, engine perfect. That's the only way it's winning. The knight is now coming to b4. And what does this mean? Okay, let's play something. Let's play knight c3. And I will only play the top moves for white. Knight c3. Knight is coming to b4, attacking the queen, and now, well, all depends on what you do with the white queen, but again, we're going to play the top moves, and the top move is offering a queen trade, because if you don't, if you go, let's say queen f2, you try it this way, then even queen c1 is possible, then the knight comes to d3, attacks the black queen and the pawn on b2, and you lose the b2 pawn that way. This way, let's say queen e2, queen captures, knight captures, and now this spectacular knight to d3 move, and white has no moves here. That is how beautiful this position is, and obviously impossible to find over the board. I would say regardless of how much time on the clock you have, because the knight is preventing the king from entering the game. There is no way this king enters the game. If the knight moves, loses control of the c1 square, then okay, obviously after knight d3, b3 was played, but still there's no move. King f8, and now there's no way to defend. If the The king cannot enter the game. The knight covers these squares. The knight can never lose control over the c1 square, otherwise you just win that pawn. And if you try to play f4 to get the king into the game this way, then you weaken e4, and then just knight c5 attacks e4, attacks b3. You lose the pawn and the game. So that would be an engine perfect way to finish the game once h4 was played. But of course, these are some very nice humans we are talking about here. Boris played king to f8. We have pawn to h5 and king to e7. Makes sense, you bring the king into the game. Knight f2 and now queen to e3. Improving the position of the queen and having some tricks in mind. I'm not going to mention them because it will spoil the main pause the video moment. Queen to d1 by Borislav and pawn to f6. We have king to f1, knight to b3. Now coming to d2, king to g2 and knight to d2. We have knight h3. And now knight captures on c4, grabbing a pawn and ready to grab another pawn. So here knight to f4 was played, trying to create some chances here with maybe knight g6 check, and then somehow the queen gets into the game, maybe something happens. But even though there are many ways you can win this game for Boris, there is one that is particularly painful. Feel free to pause the video and figure it out while I give you a couple of seconds. Congratulations to everyone who found it. As you always have to be mindful of such relationships between the knight and the heavy pieces. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, queen captures on f4. This is what Boris played, and he was in this position on move 36 that Borislav resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once the queen is captured, knight e3 check will pick up the white queen, and okay, you either face another check or you go, I guess, to g1, then knight captures d2, will go after the pawn, and then after the pawn moves, well, whatever, really, just b5, a4 wins the game. You can even give up the knight, it doesn't really matter. There is no stopping that pawn, it's just too fast. So you're going to get a queen and an easily winning endgame. And yeah, after queen captures on f4, Borislav resigned, and another great victory for Boris Spassky, who continues to, well, impress us all in this very nice event. That is the Piatigorsky, the second Piatigorsky Cup of 1966. And yeah, next is the game against Bobby Fischer. We already have seen that game, but just in case you're just joining us on this little adventure, will be the first link in the description below. The encounter of Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, not a bad way to, improve your day. And also for those maybe who haven't seen the previous video in this tournament, these are the final standings. I've already mentioned it countless times, so it's not really a surprise, but Boris won it half a point ahead of Bobby Fischer. Fischer with 11 and Bent Larsen with 10. That's third place. Then Nc3 Qa4, Križevci, Petrosyan, Knight of Ivkov and Nd1. So yeah, pretty amazing event, and we're gonna cover some of the games from Fischer, from Spassky, and if you guys have any suggestions, I would be very happy to show some other players as well. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely done by both Borislav and Boris, but Boris was the better Boris in this game. I would like to thank Priscilla Woodley, Gerhard Homa, David Gasparian, Feral Gerald, and Mike Manson for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.